Hi, welcome to Walk in the Carpenter Shop, where we are taking some time and trying to learn some things, maybe like Jesus learned working beside Joseph in that carpenter shop, getting some questions that need to be answered about life, why things work, why things are the way they are, what does it look like. We all need to grow. And so in the carpenter shop is a place where hopefully you're finding some of that can happen. I know that I am. And I want to read you a passage of Scripture out of Psalm 81, verse 6, out of the Christian Standard Bible. It says, I relieved his shoulder from the burden. What a great verse. Now, hopefully you hear that and you go, Christian Standard Version Bible, okay, I don't usually read that one. And that's probably not what the NIV or the New King James might say. And you're right, it probably doesn't. And then you might say, well, Jeff, can you put it in context for me? Because that would help me. And you're right, it would. But I'm not going to. Instead, what I'm going to do is just simply ask you the question, do you ever have those moments where you feel like you're carrying around a heavy burden? There was a bull elk in Colorado not too long ago that if you've ever carried a heavy burden, you can identify with. And you say, what are you talking about? Well, this bull elk had somehow managed to stick its head into an abandoned car tire, and it got caught around his neck. And as his antlers grew, apparently what had happened was the tire became impossible to shake off. He was tracked for 2 years as he wandered around with this tire caught on his neck. I could use a pun here and say, that was one tired elk, but I won't do that. Or perhaps I just did. Anyway, this is one tired elk that is wandering around. And so his heavy rubber necklace weighed him down day and night. Finally, wildlife officials were able to track him down. Of course, he didn't take kindly to having anybody grab the tire around his neck. And it had been there for a couple years. And so they had to sedate him, get him unconscious, cut the tire off. And when the bull elk woke up, all of a sudden, the burden that he'd carried for so long and had gotten used to, by the way, was gone. And then they released him back into the wild. It dawned on me as I heard the story about that elk that sometimes I'm like that elk and maybe you're like that elk because we carry burdens around with us. And burdens tend to be seasonal. I mean, maybe you've been carrying some burdens for a long time, but I think for the most part, our burdens tend to be seasonal. We have them for a while. They go away. We replace them with other burdens. I mean, we've got different things we carry all the time. But sometimes we can get so good at carrying the burden that we don't always understand that there's relief coming. And when the relief comes, we don't know how to act. And so when we go back to the psalm that says, I relieved his shoulder from the burden, we're reminded that no matter what it is that we're carrying, God is present and He's with us. And when we're carrying a burden, He invites us to cast it upon Him, cast all our cares upon Him. And when we keep taking that burden back, we also have to remember that we're not alone, and that burden's not as heavy because we're not carrying it by ourselves. He's doing most of the heavy lifting. And so don't be afraid to let Him take those burdens. And don't get so bullheaded that you stick your head in the middle of a problem and end up with a burden that you didn't need to have in the first place. And that really is the tragedy of the bull elk, isn't it? He ended up carrying a burden for 2 years that had he not put his head in the tire, he wouldn't have had to mess with. And so there's a whole nother carpenter shop lesson in there, I'm sure. But we won't do it today because, well, I know that you're getting tired. And I look forward to joining you next time here in the Carpenter Shop.